Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Peppis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Laura Heit. Heit is an experimental filmmaker and performance artist who works in animated art, puppetry, installations, and performance. She's an assistant professor of animated arts at the Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland. Heit's animated installation and film Two Ways Down is on view at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art through March 29th, 2015. Thank you, Laura, for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
What led to the creation of Two Ways Down?
Lots of things.
Choose any avenue.
Well, lots of things. For a long, I've been doing short animated films for a long time, and at the same time, I've been doing performance and puppetry, and they've always been parallel and never quite overlapped. So for a long time, I've wanted to do a piece that contained both of the things I do. So in a sense, this is that first attempt at doing that, combining my interest in performance as well as animation. I've tried it in several ways to combine performance and filmmaking, and this is one way it seemed to work out. I had started drawing these very small loops of animation. Actually, when I had a baby, so what I had were these little amounts of time, these little nap times, and so what worked for me was to be able to draw very stream of consciously, to just sit down and draw, and I was drawing on index cards. And I would just draw until that action felt complete. And so they were always looping actions. And so these are the kinds of little animated pieces I could do, maybe 2 or 3 in an hour, or maybe one, maybe it was longer, or sometimes shorter. They're like between 15 and 40 drawings a piece on little bits of paper. And that was very satisfying because I could sit down and complete something in a short amount of time. And I just made piles of these. And kind of let those build as a sort of library of materials, knowing that at some point I would use those as a bigger piece, but letting myself have the opportunity to let it become what it needed to become and not worry from the beginning what it would be. And so having accumulated loops, it really lent itself to the idea of an installation, which is for me a space that you can enter and exit and be immersed within. And so the function of a loop works very well in that instance because you can come and go, and it can always be changing. Whereas a film has a beginning and end, and it's finite in that sense. My interest in combining performance and film also contain my interest in the differences between recorded and live, the ideas of recorded and live. So I think of performance as being live, meaning it can only happen in that moment, and to experience it you need to be there. And recorded being, certainly something that has to be, that there's media involved, right? So anything recorded, there's going to be it on tape or film or video, or it's going to be recorded and it can be repeated. So there's this gesture of repetition in that way, and also it's unchanging, right? Whereas a live piece can never be the same. So I really think in this installation I was working with those ideas as well, the live and the recorded. And in a sense, I think of this installation as being a live film. I see it as performative in that you can enter the space and it's never quite the same. The entire piece is looping, so there's the animated loops that I began with, the drawings on index cards, and I made a film from those, so I took the small loops and I scanned them and brought them into the computer, and then created a long loop. So I made a film that itself loops, made up of small loops. And the whole piece will sound like this. It's just loop upon loop upon loop. So it's a 5-minute loop that within it created with the smaller loops. And that loop illustrates sort of life and death and resurrection. So it starts with fire, and then skulls and smoke and floating heads, and then disparate body parts, and then body parts that are combined with animals to create these little hybrid microbodies, I was calling them, which then learn to walk. So sort of this idea of learning to be in this earth, or in this place that we are, inhabit it, walk on it. And then they turn into flying things. So they come closer to that which is off the ground, and then they turn into specters, so little flying ghosts figures, and then burst into flames again. So
I know that you've spoken about this as inspired by the sort of instant when natural disaster happens.
Right, so there's this loop of the drawing, so the animated drawing, the hand-drawn animation, which is what I just described. And for me, that it is this like cycle of life. It's the back to dirt, right? It's like life and back to dirt. But also, there's two other things I'm thinking about in this piece. One, I went back to the Hieronymus Bosch painting, Garden of Earthly Delights, which is 3 panels. It's Adam and Eve on the left, and the middle is disputed. It's basically a painting full of all naked figures in moments of pleasure. There's lots of fruit. There's lots of it's really beautiful. Everyone's enjoying themselves. So it's Paradise Lost. It's probably an allegory, because the third panel is a hellscape. It's Bosch's idea of hell. So you can read it in that order. You know, this happened and this happens. And I've seen this painting in Venice many years ago. One of the things that comes back in all of my work is the idea of scale. And this painting, and all of Bosch's paintings, they're not huge, but they're maybe 5 feet tall. But the figures are maybe 1.5 inches. They're very small, and there's hundreds of them on these panels. And so in his image of Paradise Lost or in hell, there's hundreds and hundreds of figures. And in some ways I see it as him trying to take to make a painting of an entire moment in time. Whereas a lot of times in painting, it's a tableau. It's a scene it functions to show us a scene, not trying to illustrate the whole world at that time. So I see this hellscape as trying to show all of hell in his use of scale, really. It's not, a lot of times in this period, there's smaller things in the background. You're looking at perspective, but all of his figures are small. There is perspective, but it's its own unique type of perspective. But also what's interesting in his hellscape is this mashup of animals and humans. So in his illustration of hell, it's when animals take control, I think. It's when, and in some sense, I think, as humans, as we became more and more civilized, we became more fearful of animals as we try to control them. And they are wild, you know, and they do not speak our language. So in his vision of it, they are eating the humans, they are taking control of them. There's a lot of mixing up of humans and animals. So maybe a torso of a human with chicken legs, or a fish head with an arm sticking out. So grotesque in a sense. So I did start by revisiting that painting and doing some sketching of these animal-human hybrids. And then I kind of closed the book and went from there visually. It did put me in a place where I was thinking about hell and maybe a modern idea of hell, and it brought me to this place we are now, where we're just seeing more and more and more of these huge natural disasters and catastrophes, and it feels like there are more and more of them all the time, and they just seem to be bigger and bigger. And I think that it's true. it's also, there's so many things now that also feel like more because we're better at documenting them. We're better at knowing about them because of media and these kinds of things. There's records of things, so I'm not, I don't want to proclaim I know there are more, but it feels like it, and they affect us all more and more, and we can relate them to ideas of climate change, and we can relate them to things we're doing to cause them, possibly, and that's becoming clearer and clearer. And it also, to me, if in making art, we're always trying to visualize or to make ideas about things that affect us, like this idea of a universal language, right? Maybe in the idea of modern art and paintings, like the idea of going back to abstraction, to kind of be able to speak emotively to anybody. So I think all artists are trying to do that in their own way. So for myself, that was an interesting place to think that in those moments it does feel like hell to me, or there's that mixture of this could be the end. There's this feeling of fear, huge amount of fear, unknowingness of what could happen. But most interesting to me, because what I always like to try to solve in my work is how to visualize the things we can't see. And so for me, the thing we can't see in those instances are the things that happen in that split second of the disaster. So like the Oso mudslide or a typhoon. So sure, we know a wave comes over, but how many people could tell you, even if they were in it, exactly what happened in that moment? And what is the similar in all of these instances is that humanity and nature collide. So I'm less interested in acts of war, that kind of disaster right now anyway in my work, and more in this collision of nature and civilization, really. And in those split seconds, how they're both rearranged. So both have found an entirely new arrangement, and usually end up rearranged, right? The aftermath shows us our architecture fallen to pieces, parts of nature where they haven't been, I won't say shouldn't be, but where they haven't been, and vice versa. So the second part of this installation was to take this drawn animation, which was in my head the figures in that moment, right? This mashup of life and death, and also humanity and nature and civilization, and in that loop of coming and going. Because after all these disasters, things come back, things are rebuilt, nature regrows itself, and there's a cycle there as well. So I took the film and I wanted to create spaces that represented these disasters. So more physical embodiments of these catastrophes, and put the figures in them. So that was the next thing to solve, was how to put the animated film into physical spaces. So I created these tiny little paper sculptures with white paper, where I cut out shapes and trees and buildings and like little visualizations of these events. So one generally they're abstract in their own way. One represents a hurricane, and one's a blizzard, and one's a flood, and one's a typhoon. And then in the piece, they're on the table on motors, so they're constantly moving, and again in a circle very slowly, and there's lights on them projecting those little models. They're like this big onto the wall, so we see shadows of them overlapping with other moments, as if to say all of these are happening all the time. And then the animation is projected through pieces of glass. It's very complicated to explain. Through pieces of glass that are at angles, and it refracts sections of the animation onto the walls into the shadow worlds. So now we have the figures that I'm imagining in the shadows of these moments.
So you mentioned before that you understand this piece as performative.
Mm-hmm.
But when I walk into it, you're not there performing. So what's doing the performing here?
Well, I think of it as performative in that it's live.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening in real time. Mm-hmm. This is not a piece you could ever watch on video. I think your director recorded some that you'll see cut into this interview.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful, but it's not the same piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's important in this work that you're in the space,
Mm-hmm.
and as you walk into it, you are performing in it. Your own shadow is cast on the wall within the shadows. You get the animation projected onto you, and you're implicit. You're implicit in these events and this time and this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also never the same. In the same way live events are that way. You know, you could see the same performance twice, and they might be similar, but they won't be the same. The audience will be making different noises. The performer might be in a different mood or have on a different costume or use different lines, or there's the nuance there of it never being captured.
Say a little bit more about the role of the viewer that you say they're implicated in it. Why is that an important part for you? Why is it important that we become part of the performance?
I want you to, I want you to feel, in this piece I want you to look closer. And so I'm doing that in many ways. One, I'm inviting you to be within the piece. I think it's pretty rare people just stand at the entrance and don't come into it. But also playing with scale always asks you to look closer, and I'm very aware of that in making this piece. That I could have made the models any size. I could have made them life size that you walked into. But what I want you to do is have to come up and say, oh, and look very closely at the size of the models. And also to understand that what you see on the walls is a shadow and is only... it's elusive in that way, much like the experience of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's there momentarily, and it isn't recorded or captured. Very much like these moments of even just you could say even in replicating the idea of fear, right? It's momentary,
Mm-hmm.
or any emotion, and I like that sort of temporary quality of it.
Say a little bit more about the repetitive or the circular or the cyclical quality of, because all of these things are looping.
Mm-hmm.
So the table with the sculptures is in motion, and there are loops and loops, and as you enter, your viewers are sort of encouraged to walk around the table in the center. Why is that sort of cyclical, repetitive quality so crucial?
Well, again, it's just right back to the very simple idea of life and death and coming back again. So it all starts with a circle, and I think using the layering of circles also makes the piece infinite. So I'm sure it's possible if I use some programming and some sequencing and timing of the motors, but I haven't. They're just motors and a looping animation, so they're never going to be in sync. They're never going to line up the same way. So it's forever changing.
Why is it in this era of digital everything and computer everything, you seem to hold on in this piece to techniques that are older? The paper sculptures, the motors, the projector, these film loops. Why is it important to sort of keep the work of the artist's hand evident to your viewer? Why aren't you making it all computer animated, for example?
I have no desire to make it all computer animated.
Fair enough.
I think you make what you I think you make what feels right. And for myself, I always try to balance that out. Certainly I use computers for some parts of it, and there is a digital projector. But you're right, it's very low tech ultimately. It appears very technical. I get that a lot. But it's just glass and paper and one projector and some glue. And I think that's often how I make work. It starts with simple materials. I always have a large section of it that's made by hand. So the animation was drawn on paper. I didn't draw it on the computer because I found that drawing on paper is what it is in my practice. It's inherent to my drawing intuition. It's intuitive. I can sit down and draw. And certainly I can draw on the computer. I've done it a lot, but it doesn't feel as intuitive. Where I could sit down and draw, and I also, very key, and I teach as well, with the computer you undo all the time. It's actually, I think the trick with learning to draw now on the computer is stopping yourself from erasing. So when I drew these, I actually made a real point to myself to never erase, or if I did, to not throw that card away, but to leave the erasure. But also drawing on paper left a lot of room for mistakes, so there was a real raw quality to the drawing to me, which I think with computers we almost have gotten rid of. You see sometimes people going back and adding filters and effects to work to make it look more handmade, I think, really. But computers do tend to allow us too much time to edit ourselves, I guess. So having a balance for me is really good. I like to have things come out as fresh and raw as possible, and to work with that rather than the other way around.
You've spoken about scale and about the handmade. One of the series of works that you've done, you call them the Matchbox shows, which are at a very small scale. Tell us a little bit, describe those a little bit, and tell us about your inspiration for that. So when you say Matchbox.
Yeah, it's a solo performance piece I've been doing for a very long time now. And it started because I had been doing large-scale spectacle theater in Chicago for many, many years, meaning like very large scale. So if you know Bread and Puppet, that kind started that scale, but it's often outside, large-scale puppets and parades and that kind of thing. And the theater is so that's my background in theater. It's not traditional theater. It's more the spectacle-based performative work. And after many years of that, which is always collaborative and always involves a lot of people, I had this need to make something quickly by myself. And the joke was as small as possible because I'd been making these huge things. So I quickly made a show in a matchbox. So inside a matchbox the rule was I couldn't rehearse it, and I had to make it in less than an hour. And I performed, and then I made a bunch of those, and I did a little performance of them, and I've been doing it ever since. So they are inside matchboxes, and then I have a video camera on it. I do it at a table, and it's projected live above me as big as possible. So the change in scale is really a lot of what the show's about. The shows are like anywhere from 10 seconds to 5 minutes long, and I kind of dump them out and do a series of them in an evening. It's like a miniature cabaret.
Can you describe one of these Matchbox shows?
Well, they're all different. Some are true, based on my own life. Some are dreams. Some are short stories I've rewritten. One is about a woman I met in college who, well, let's just say in the end, the story we end up going to the Chicago Lincoln Park Zoo, and we scale the fence, and she swims with the sea lions.
And this is done in a matchbox.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, very small.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on these days? New work.
Yeah, I'm just starting a new project, so it's still formative. But what I'm really interested in right now, again, going back to this idea of trying to visualize things we can't ourselves see, all these, I'm interested in, and I've been collecting all these witness reports, mostly from the police shootings of black men, mostly. There's all sorts of shootings. But what I'm interested in is when these things hit the news, you hear a lot of different eyewitness accounts, and they're all very different. So I want to create animated images that layer all of these accounts in some way to create one single image and what that might look like.
Projected on top of each other?
I don't know yet.
Yeah,
Probably, yeah.
So you are a filmmaker also, and you're one of the things you're doing while you're in Eugene with the show is you're showing some films for the Schnitzer cinema. Tell us a little bit about we have just a couple of minutes left. Tell us a little bit about your work as a filmmaker other than the things you've described to us.
Well, my films have all been animated. Every film is a different technique. I don't usually stick to one type of animation. So tonight I'll be showing, I did one live action puppet film. So it's animated in a sense. My very first computer animation, which is actually about September 11th, so it kind of circles back to this idea of catastrophe. And one that is actually about facing fear, and it's represented it's all done in cycles again, and it's a figure of a woman and a wolf, and it's lots of layers of light and textures and
light, textures, motion.
Yeah, cycles.
Cycles.
That film really brought me into this piece now, actually, because it was all built on cycles and layering of light. I'd go out and capture sequences of light through trees or car lights and long exposures.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We're looking forward to your films and your talk tonight. I urge everybody to come see Two Ways Down. It's a great show. Thanks for taking the time speaking with us.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Laura Heit, experimental filmmaker and performance artist. Her animated installation and film, Two Ways Down, is on view at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art through March 29th, 2015. Thank you so much for watching.